Hey Maya, do your Charo impression.
You know my name is Maria, Teresa, Anita, Luisa, but you can call me Charo, and I do coochie coochie. Aloha and welcome back to my channel. I'm Marilyn Maya Mendoza, the baby boomer booktuber, and this is my February wrap-up and salsa extravaganza. In my beginning teaser, I impersonated Charo, who was very important in my life because when I got married very young, I used to watch the Merv Griffin show, and she was always on, and she would always get up and do her coochie coochie dance, and I loved it. It was a highlight for me. And I am Puerto Rican, so my father used to talk with a similar accent, so that's okay, I guess. I am going to start with the books, because if you're here for the books, they're in the beginning. If you watch to the end, you will see my last public performance of my salsa dancing, where I'm wearing the same dress. It was about 6 years ago, and I hope you will like it because a few of you asked me for more dancing. So that's the last dance that I have that I danced in public. Well, if you don't count my little dancing that I danced for on my YouTube channel, on this YouTube channel. Well, February was an interesting month. It's not the end, but I wanted to wrap up a few books because March is coming up, and it's March Mystery Madness, which I'm going to take a big part of because mystery is my go-to place for happiness. I'm even going to show you one at the end because I couldn't wait. For Black History Month, I wanted to read 3 books. One was Passing by Nella Larson, and it never came. I'm still waiting for it, and it will be in a next video. But I did read a book that I didn't haul, and it's Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. And I read this in one sitting. I loved this so much. I read it when I was in my 20s or 30s, but I think I wasn't mature enough to understand how good his writing is, and his writing is amazing. I want to read you the first chapter, but let me just tell you what it's about. This is one of James Baldwin's greatest works. Giovanni's Room is a groundbreaking novel that traces one man's struggle with his sexual identity. In a 1950s Paris swarming with expatriates and characterized by dangerous liaisons and hidden violence, an American finds himself confronting secret desires that jeopardizes the conventional life he envisions for himself. After meeting and proposing to a young woman, he falls into a lengthy affair with an Italian bartender and is confounded and tortured as he oscillates between the two. The first thing that surprised me when reading the book is that he is writing a novel, and it's not about African American people. It's about a white man. And after reading it, I'm thinking he didn't want to put that other aspect in the book because that would have made it a different book and more complicated. I wish he did, though, and I think when I read it at first, I thought he did, but it's very clear he's talking about, even in the first sentence or the first page, his blonde hair. But anyway, let me read you what a beautiful first sentence this is. I stand at the window of this great house in the south of France as night falls, the night which is leading me to the most terrible morning of my life. I have a drink in my hand. There is a bottle at my elbow. I watch my reflection in the darkening gleam of the window pane. My reflection is tall, perhaps rather like an arrow. My blonde hair gleams. My face is like a face you have seen many times. My ancestors conquered a continent, pushing across death-laden plains until they came to an ocean which faced away from Europe into a darker past. So it is in the first paragraph that he is in the body of a white man. But the book explores homosexuality in the 50s and its repercussions and how torturous it was for some men to come out. I have an interesting story related to this. It's not in the 50s, but it was in the 60s, and I was 13, and my first boyfriend was, and I didn't know anything what gay was, but he was exploring his sexuality at the time, and he asked me out, and he was a high school junior, and I was 13, and of course I fell madly in love with him, and he ended up breaking up with me a year later. And then after that I found out that he was gay. But I felt for all of the people in this book. First of all, I love Paris. And Paris in the 50s had to be like really amazing. And I love the characters in this book. The man who is being tortured into accepting his homosexuality is shown quite clearly, amazingly, and beautifully. And so is Giovanni, the man he falls in love with, who is the bartender, an Italian bartender, and he is agonized by the main character's not giving himself totally to him emotionally. And the reason is because he's about to marry a woman, because he thinks that's what he has to do. And he doesn't understand his feelings in the beginning. And it's a beautiful book, and I hope everybody reads this who wants to understand about what it was to be queer in the 50s in general, even in Paris. So I highly recommend this book. My next book for Black History Month was a very involved read. It's Hood Feminism, Notes from the Women That a Movement Forgot by Mikki Kendall. And I wrote notes in this book because it affected me in a different way. I think it's an important book for everyone to read, especially white women. I might have a slightly different take on the book, although I present as white, as I said, especially when they talk about colorism, because colorism exists in almost every ethnic background, Indian background, the caste system, the Latin American background, as well as African American background. And my grandmother was mostly African presenting. No, she was African, native Indian, and she was very dark. And my father looked like his father, who was mostly from Spain, and he had blonde hair and blue eyes. So of all her grandchildren, she preferred me because I looked like my father, but also because I was white and blonde and blue-eyed. So you might think that this was something that was that I benefited from as being a white Latina. But actually, I was living at the time with my grandmother and the grandchildren, who, of course, took the revenge out because I didn't have to do any work. I was 7, of course, but even so, I was treated better than the other grandchildren, mainly because I looked like my father. And they beat me up something terrible and did horrible things to me. So I was aware of how different I was even as a child when I lived with my grandmother, who spoke no English, but that's another story. And that's in my book, by the way, that's coming up. Now, Mikki Kendall, she's, some white women might consider her an angry black woman, and she admits to it. That's her. She said she calls herself an a-hole, she calls herself mean, and she calls herself that she's not here to coddle white women into being, accepting their wonderful help. She doesn't want a savior. And she says something really interesting. And I'm going to read it to you. It says on page 7 that in general, white women are taught to think of whiteness as a default, of race as something to ignore. Their failure to appreciate the way that race and other marginalization can impact someone is often brought out in popular media. And she has a story about Lena Dunham and the show Girls, and how she was talking about a phone conversation of a black guy that was ignoring her. What I also like, what she says, is when feminist rhetoric is rooted in biases like racism, ableism, trans misogyny, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia, it automatically works against marginalized women and against any concept of solidarity. It's not enough to know that other women with different experiences exist. You must also understand that they have their own feminism formed by that experience. Whether it's an argument that women who wear the hijab must be saved from it, or reproductive justice arguments that paint having a disabled baby as the worst possible outcome, the reality is that feminism can be marginalizing. So, that was interesting. And I also, what I got out of it was also what she says in the end about being, instead of being an ally, to be an accomplice. In that way, you're not looking to save marginalized women from anti-feminism or from misogyny, but you're working with them where they are in their life. What else I have to say is that I was brought up in the hood, so a lot of the story, and I was the only white presenting girl in the 50s, so I can see how feminism, we didn't even know what feminism was, even in the 60s, when I still lived in the hood and had a struggle with finding a job, with feeding my family, all the things that she's talking about, making sure my children get educated, getting out of the violent hood that I was living in into a white neighborhood, an Italian neighborhood that didn't accept me as being one of them, because I wasn't one of them. So I ended up moving to Hawaii in 1976, and I live in a marginalized community where there are people of color are the main population where I live, and white women are the least population. What bothered me when I moved here, and I live in this community, which is Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders are the largest community. I was considered a white woman, and I lost my identity as being bicultural, being Puerto Rican. And it was, I was what they call haole. Haole means white foreigner. So I can say I've never belonged anywhere that I've lived. I belonged, even in the Puerto Rican world, when I lived in New York until '76, and all my friends were basically Puerto Rican or other Latinx people. I was always a little bit of an outsider because my Spanish wasn't perfect, and because of other reasons, because of the color of my skin, basically, blonde Puerto Rican. So I really understood a lot of what she was talking about, and I think that to be bicultural is to not fit in. And I understood a lot of what she was talking about that maybe some other white women wouldn't understand. But of course, I'm not African American, so I learned a lot from this book. So I really suggest you read it. The only side of her writing I didn't appreciate was that she went into a lot of her memoir intertwined with the stories that I thought were very well written, but really didn't belong in this kind of book. I thought she should write a memoir. So I felt that part of the book, though interesting, sort of wasn't fitting in for me in this book. And I notice a lot of people are, they don't want to, say anything bad about this book for some reason. But why are we here for? We're here to talk about our feelings about books. And this book wasn't perfect to me. So, but it's an important book, and I think people should read it. So that's Hood Feminism. Then I went into a completely different direction, reading the British novelist Elizabeth Taylor, and I didn't mention that the covers are so beautiful. And this is a Virago modern classic, and it's called In the Summer Season. Okay, I read another Elizabeth Taylor book called Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont. I loved this book. I didn't love this book, and let me tell you why. Let's go into In a Summer Season. This is about, I'll read you what it says. Much to the disapproval of her friends, Kate Herron marries handsome, feckless Dermot, a man 10 years her junior. When Charles, her own friend, visits with his beautiful daughter, Kate watches happily as their two families are drawn together. But although she finds Charles' presence reassuringly familiar, slowly she becomes aware of subtle undercurrents that begin to disturb the calm surfaces of their friendship. Before long, even Kate cannot ignore the gathering storm. So it's a book basically about an older rich woman who marries Dermot, the feckless younger guy, 10 years her junior. What I didn't like about this book, and there was a lot first of all, her writing is impeccable. Elizabeth Taylor, the novelist, was a wonderful writer. But what I didn't like was that she has no transitions between who's talking and time periods. And that was pretty annoying to me. Also, the ending was very predictable, very lazy, and I thought this is not one of her better books. But still, there's so much to love in it. So I would still recommend In a Summer Season, and I give this 3 stars. By the way, I give Hood Feminism 4 stars, and Giovanni's Room 5 stars. I want to talk a little bit about, and I mean a little bit, because I already discussed Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont. And I said it made me laugh so much. Well, I wasn't really laughing at the end, because this is about old people and about ableism. And they're not sure, they're not very exact about how old these people are in the book. And there was a part of the book where this woman has arthritis, as I do. And of course, arthritis in the, I think, early 60s wasn't as treatable as it is now. Not that it's treatable now, but it probably was less so. And a woman in the hotel that they're living in had severe arthritis, and she was, at one point, she's walking on 2 sticks. And Mrs. Paul, you know, 2 sticks basically, and trying to get around on 2 sticks. And Mrs. Palfrey mentions, she looks like a wounded insect. I have to admit, I laughed and laughed and laughed. I almost fell off my bed because just the metaphor was so vivid. And then as the book goes on, the woman doesn't come to a very good ending. And I started feeling bad. Bad for myself and bad that I laughed. Because I also have arthritis. I don't have 2 sticks, but I use 1 cane, and I realize how people look at you when you do use a cane. I mean, it's not a good look. In other words, people other you when you're disabled. So as I kept on reading the book and seeing how the old people were pictured, yes, it was funny. I love the book. I still love the book. I still love the writing. But, you know, there is a trigger for ageism and ableism. And I just wanted you to be aware of that when you read it. Because one of my plans for my future books is to read books about older, disabled, and othered people. So I still give it, if I gave it 5 stars, I give it 4.5 now. My dog Jasmine just had a bath and she's really excited, so I had to pick her up. But my last book that I want to talk about is an Agatha Christie book that I'm saving for March Mystery Madness, and it's called Murder on the Links by Agatha Christie. And I had to talk about this because I think it might be one of my favorite books so far of Agatha Christie. And also because the book is Murder on the Links by Agatha Christie. And I don't think I've ever read this. So I'll just give you a quick blurb. An urgent cry for help brings Poirot to France, but he arrives too late to save his client, whose brutally stabbed body now lies face downward in a shallow grave on a golf course. But why is the dead man wearing his son's overcoat? And who was the impassioned love letter in the pocket for? Before Poirot can answer these questions, the case is turned upside down by the discovery of a second identically murdered corpse. This was a great book. It had so many red herrings, and it really didn't cheat in telling. I didn't guess who it was at the end. Let's put it that way. But you could have guessed. So I hope you stay around and watch my Salsa extravaganza. It's a few minutes. And it was my last performance, so if you're into salsa dancing, please watch it. I'm almost to 500 subscribers, so I'm really excited. So please join me, and if you like this video, please subscribe and hit the notification bell, and I will try my best to produce videos that are exciting, funny, interesting, and important at the same time. So until we meet again, my friends, aloha.